The rain had not stopped for 3 days, and the diner on the corner of 5th and Larch smelled like burnt coffee and wet umbrellas. Emily wiped down the counter for the 4th time in 10 minutes, not because it needed it, but because her hands needed something to do that wasn't shaking. She had worked the night shift at Rosie's diner for 2 years now, ever since her father's hospital bills had swallowed every cent of savings her family had ever managed to scrape together. 26 years old, tired in the specific way that only comes from working 2 jobs and sleeping 4 hours a night, she had long since stopped believing that anything unusual would ever happen to her. That belief lasted exactly until the black cars pulled up outside, 3 of them, sleek and silent, water sliding off their hoods like they were built to repel even the weather itself. The bell above the door rang, and 4 men walked in, filling the small diner with a kind of gravity that made every other customer instinctively lower their voice. At the center of them walked a man in a charcoal overcoat, tall, composed, his dark eyes moving across the room once before settling, briefly, on Emily. She would learn his name soon enough, Victor Castellano. He said nothing to her that first night. He simply sat in the corner booth, ordered black coffee, and watched the rain through the window while his men stood near the door like statues carved from patience. Emily served him without a word, and when she set the coffee down, he looked up at her for exactly 2 seconds too long. "Thank you," Victor said, his voice low and even. "You're welcome," Emily said, and walked away before her voice could betray how unsettled she felt. He came back the next night, and the night after that. By the end of the 2nd week, Priya, the other night shift waitress, had noticed the pattern too. "He only orders coffee," Priya said one night, leaning against the counter as Victor's car idled outside. "A man like that, with cars like that, and he just sits there drinking coffee for 2 hours. He's not here for the coffee." E minor. "Don't start," Emily said. "I'm just saying. Everyone in this town knows who Victor Castellano is. You don't run 3 trucking companies, half the docks, and God knows what else without people talking. And people talk about him a lot." Emily didn't answer. She already knew the stories. The whispered rumors about the Castellano name, about men who disappeared after crossing him, about warehouses that burned down conveniently the week before an audit. Second-hand and half-believed, urban legend dressed up as neighborhood gossip. That was how the stories had always reached her. But the man sitting in the corner booth every night didn't look like a legend. He looked tired, in a way that mirrored her own exhaustion, though his tiredness wore a much more expensive suit. 3 weeks in, on a Thursday, Victor finally said more than a sentence to her. "You always look like you're carrying something heavier than a coffee pot," Victor said, watching her refill his cup. Emily paused. "Everyone's carrying something. Not everyone carries it as quietly as you do." She didn't know what to say to that, so she said nothing, and he let the silence sit between them without discomfort, the way a man does when he is used to being obeyed rather than questioned. 2 nights later, he asked about her father. She never told him. She was certain she never told him. But somehow he knew. The hospital, the surgery, the mounting debt that had her working double shifts on 4 hours of sleep. When she asked how he knew, Victor only said, "I make it my business to know things," and offered no apology for it. She should have been afraid. Some small, sensible part of her was, but a larger part of her, worn thin by years of exhaustion and worry, felt something dangerously close to relief at being seen by someone who seemed capable of fixing things. Emily had grown up in a house where money was discussed the way other families discussed weather, a constant, low-grade concern that shaped every decision without ever being named directly. Her father, a retired machinist, had worked with his hands for 30 years before his heart gave out on a Sunday morning while he was fixing the gutter on their small house. The surgery that followed saved his life and emptied the family's savings in the same breath. Emily picked up the slack the way the oldest child in a struggling family always does, quietly, without complaint, and without anyone quite noticing how much of her own future she was setting aside to do it. None of this came out directly. It surfaced in fragments, a mention of her community college classes on hold, a comment about her sister's tuition, a tired joke about how she hadn't taken a vacation since before her father's surgery. Victor listened to each fragment, like a man studying a map he intended to memorize, and Emily didn't realize until much later how carefully he had been assembling the full picture from pieces she thought were too small to matter. Priya noticed the change in Emily before Emily did. "You're smiling at the coffee pot," Priya said one night, nudging her with an elbow. "Nobody smiles at a coffee pot unless they're thinking about someone." "I'm not thinking about anyone." "Uh-huh. And I suppose those extra 10 minutes you spend wiping down his booth are just about hygiene." Emily didn't have a good answer for that, and Priya, wisely, didn't push further that night. But the seed of worry had been planted, and it would grow steadily over the following weeks, right alongside whatever it was Emily herself was refusing to name. Part 1. The Envelope. The envelope arrived on a Tuesday, slid across the counter by one of Victor's men, while Victor himself sat in his usual booth, watching. Alone in the back room, Emily opened it with trembling hands. Inside was a cashier's check, made out to St. Agnes Memorial Hospital, in an amount that made her knees weak. It covered the entirety of her father's remaining medical debt. She marched back out to the dining room, the check clutched in her fist, and set it down hard on Victor's table. "I can't accept this," Emily said. "It's already been sent," Victor said calmly. "The hospital confirmed the payment an hour ago. You had no right. I had every right. It's my money. That's not what I mean, and you know it." Her voice rose, and two of his men shifted near the door, though Victor raised two fingers slightly and they went still again. "You don't get to walk into my life and start paying for things. I don't know you. I don't want to know you like this." Victor studied her for a long moment, something unreadable crossing his face. "Most people would have thanked me. I'm not most people," Emily said. "And I don't want to owe a man like you anything." "A man like me," Victor repeated slowly. "You know exactly what I mean." For the first time since she had met him, genuine surprise crossed Victor's face, not offense, not anger, but the particular startlement of a man unaccustomed to being refused. He said nothing else that night. He left his coffee unfinished, dropped a bill on the table that was far too large for the check, and walked out into the rain with his men trailing behind him. Emily didn't sleep that night. She lay awake replaying the conversation, furious at herself for the money she desperately needed and had just as desperately turned away. Furious at him for making the offer feel less like generosity and more like a transaction she'd never agreed to. Her father's debt remained paid regardless. The hospital confirmed it the next morning when she called, panicked, hoping there was some way to reverse it. There wasn't. "I'm sorry, miss," the woman on the phone said. "The account shows a zero balance. Whoever made that payment, it's already processed." Emily hung up and sat on the edge of her bed for a long time. Gratitude tangled with a resentment she couldn't fully justify. Beneath both, a small, unwelcome flicker of curiosity about a man who paid off strangers' hospital bills and expected nothing but a thank you in return. Her mother called that same afternoon, voice thick with relief and confusion in equal measure. "Emily, honey, the hospital called your father directly. Said the balance is zero. Do you know anything about this? It's complicated, Mom." "Complicated how? Did you win something? Did someone die and leave us money?" Her mother's laugh was nervous, hopeful, entirely unprepared for the actual answer. "Someone I know from work paid it," Emily said carefully. "I told him not to. I didn't ask for it." A long pause sat on the line. "Emily, whatever this is, whoever this is, your father hasn't slept without pain in 3 years. If someone made that go away, I don't think I have it in me to be angry about how." Emily didn't have a response for that either. She loved her mother for the plainness of it, and hated, just slightly, how completely it undercut her own outrage. She had marched into that diner ready to return the money on principle, and instead, she'd spent the rest of the week fielding calls from relieved family members who saw nothing wrong with a stranger's generosity, only the practical relief of a debt finally lifted. That tension, between what she knew was right to feel and what she actually felt, kept her awake most nights that week, turning the situation over without ever quite resolving it. Part 2. The Proposal. Victor didn't come to the diner for 11 days after that. Emily told herself she was relieved. She told herself this more times than was strictly necessary for someone who was actually relieved. On the 12th day, a car came for her instead of him. It waited outside her apartment building at 7 in the morning, and the driver, a broad-shouldered man named Marco, informed her politely that Mr. Castellano had requested her presence for breakfast, and that he would wait as long as necessary. "Tell him I have work," Emily said. "He's already spoken to your manager," Marco said, not unkindly. "You have the morning off." For one long moment, Emily considered slamming the door in his face. But curiosity, exhaustion, and a healthy dose of self-preservation, better to hear him out on her own terms than to be surprised again, won out, and she climbed into the car. Victor was waiting at a restaurant she had walked past 100 times, but never once considered entering. The kind of place where the tablecloths alone probably cost more than her monthly rent. He stood when she arrived, which surprised her more than anything else that morning. "You didn't have to bribe my manager," Emily said, sitting down across from him. "I didn't bribe him, I asked. He said yes because he respects you, and because I told him it mattered." That's still using your position to get what you want. I've never pretended otherwise, Victor said, and his bluntness disarmed her more than any denial would have. They ate in relative quiet, Victor asking careful questions about her father's recovery, her sister in Ohio, the community college classes she'd put on hold 3 years ago when the money ran out. He listened without checking his phone, without steering the conversation back to himself. Why me? Emily finally asked, halfway through the meal. You could have anyone, women with your kind of money, your kind of world. Why does a waitress from a diner on 5th Street matter to you at all? Victor considered the question longer than she expected. Because you didn't know who I was the first night you served me coffee, and you still treated me like I might be difficult. Everyone else in my life has spent years deciding what I want to hear before I've said a word. You just told me the coffee machine was broken, and I'd have to wait 10 minutes like everyone else. That's a low bar for falling for someone. It's a high bar for honesty. You'd be surprised how rare it actually is. In my world, your world, Emily repeated. You keep saying that like it's a separate country. It might as well be. Something flickered behind his eyes, brief and unguarded. I inherited it before I was old enough to understand what I was inheriting. By the time I understood, there was no clean way out. I've made my peace with what I am, Emily. I'm not asking you to make peace with it too. I'm asking you to let me build something separate from it. With you, if you'll let me. Over coffee, he finally said what he had clearly been building toward the entire meal. I want you to consider something, Victor said. Marry me. Emily nearly dropped her cup. You're joking. I don't joke about things like this. We've had maybe 6 conversations. 7, counting this one, Victor said. I know how it sounds. I'm not asking for love, Emily. Not yet. I am asking for a partnership. You would want for nothing. Your father's care, your sister's education, your own future, all of it secured, permanently. In exchange, you would be my wife, and you would stand beside me the way a wife of mine is expected to stand. You're describing a business deal. I'm describing a life most people would kill for. Something cold settled into Emily's chest, replacing the warmth of the meal entirely. Is that what I am to you? A deal to close? That's not what I meant. It's exactly what you meant. Emily stood. You think because you paid off a hospital bill, because you can send a car and clear my schedule and buy a table at a restaurant I could never afford, that you're entitled to buy me too. I'm not a warehouse you can acquire, Victor. I'm not a shipment you can reroute. I have a say in my own life, and the answer is no. Victor's jaw tightened, but his voice remained level. Sit down, please. Let me explain properly. No. This time the word carried a different weight. Not panic, not uncertainty, but the calm, unshakable finality of a decision fully made. I won't marry a man who thinks kindness is a down payment. Whatever this was, it's over. She walked out of the restaurant without looking back, leaving Victor Castellano alone at a table meant for a celebration that had just become something else entirely. Part 3. In front of his men, she thought that would be the end of it. She was wrong. 2 weeks later, Emily's cousin Danielle was getting married, and the reception spilled out of a modest banquet hall into the parking lot, string lights strung haphazardly between 2 lampposts, the smell of barbecue mixing with cheap champagne. It was exactly the kind of ordinary, joyful chaos Emily needed after weeks of turning Victor's proposal over and over in her mind. Danielle had married her college sweetheart, a soft-spoken accountant named Tom, and the reception was exactly the kind of event Emily's family threw best. Too much food, too little seating, and a playlist that swung wildly between decades, depending on which relative had commandeered the speaker last. Emily spent the evening dancing with her nephews, eating cake off a paper plate balanced on her knee, feeling for the first time in weeks like a person whose entire life wasn't defined by a man in a charcoal overcoat. She had almost convinced herself the whole strange chapter was closed. Almost. She didn't expect him to be there, but there he was, standing near the edge of the parking lot, with 3 of his men flanking him, dressed far too well for a backyard wedding reception, having apparently learned through the same quiet channels that told him everything else about her life that this was where she would be tonight. The music didn't stop all at once. It faded the way a record does when someone lifts the needle mid-song, guests near the parking lot noticing first, conversations trailing off as they turned to look. The hush spread backward through the crowd, like a ripple moving against the current, until even the DJ, sensing something had shifted, quietly lowered the volume without being asked. Emily's Aunt Carol grabbed her arm. Is that, Emily? Is that the man from the diner? The one your mother mentioned? I don't know why he's here, Emily said. though even as she said it, she suspected exactly why. Heads turned toward the black cars parked at the curb, toward the men in dark suits who so clearly did not belong among the paper lanterns and folding chairs. Nobody spoke. Victor walked toward her, unhurried, the way he always moved, as though time itself waited for him rather than the other way around. "Emily," Victor said, "I came to ask you properly. In front of witnesses, so there's no confusion about what I'm offering or what I mean by it. You need witnesses to propose now?" Emily said, aware of her family watching, aware of Danielle standing frozen near the cake table in her wedding dress, aware of every single guest who had gone suddenly, uncomfortably still. "I need you to understand I'm serious," Victor said. He reached into his coat and produced a small box, opening it to reveal a ring that caught the string lights and threw them back in fractured, expensive light. "Marry me, Emily. Not as a transaction, as a choice. I've thought about nothing else for 2 weeks." The parking lot held its breath. Even his own men seemed unsettled, glancing at each other, clearly unaccustomed to watching Victor Castellano ask for anything in public, let alone something he could be refused. Emily looked at the ring, then at his face, then let her gaze sweep slowly across the 4 men standing behind him, each one watching her with the particular tension of soldiers awaiting an order they couldn't predict. "No," Emily said. The word landed hard. "I won't marry you," Emily continued, her voice steady even as her heart pounded. "Not for money, not for security, not for a ring that cost more than this entire wedding. You don't know how to ask for something without turning it into a demonstration of power. You brought an audience because you wanted to make refusing you feel impossible. It isn't. I reject you, Victor. Completely, and in front of everyone you brought here to make sure I couldn't." Somewhere behind her, Emily heard her aunt gasp. One of Victor's men shifted his weight, his hand twitching slightly at his side before going still. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Victor stood motionless, the ring box still open in his palm, his expression unreadable in a way that made even his own men uneasy. The string lights swayed gently overhead, in a breeze that suddenly felt too loud. And then, Victor Castellano did something none of them expected. He closed the ring box, slid it back into his coat, and inclined his head toward her. Not in anger, not in the cold fury his men clearly braced for, but in something that looked, unmistakably, like respect. "Understood," Victor said quietly. He turned to his men. "We're leaving. Apologize to the bride for the interruption on your way out." Then, without another word, without so much as a final glance back at Emily, Victor Castellano walked to his car and drove away. An entire parking lot of wedding guests stood frozen behind him. Emily stayed rooted to the spot, staring after taillights disappearing into the dark, feeling far less triumphant than she had expected to feel. Part 4. The silence after. Danielle found her the morning after the wedding, still in yesterday's makeup, holding 2 coffees and looking far more amused than a bride whose reception had been interrupted by an armed entourage had any right to look. "So," Danielle said, handing Emily a cup and settling onto the porch steps beside her. "That was not the toast I was expecting to steal the spotlight from mine. I'm so sorry, Danny. I had no idea he'd come." "Don't apologize. Honestly, it's the most anyone's talked about my wedding all week, and for once, it's not about whether Tom's mother approved of the venue." Danielle nudged her shoulder. "But seriously, are you okay?" That looked intense. "I don't know what I am," Emily admitted. "Relieved, mostly, and a little sick if I'm honest. I've never said no to someone like that in my life. I don't think I've ever said no to anyone with that much room to hurt me, if he'd wanted to." "And you don't think he wanted to?" Emily considered the question longer than she expected to. "I don't know. That's the part that scares me. He just left. No threats, no anger, not that I could see, just understood, like I'd told him the kitchen was out of the soup special." "Maybe that's worse," Danielle said. "Maybe that's better. I genuinely can't tell. And I've had 2 years of business school teaching me how to read people." "Neither can I," Emily said. For a while, the 2 of them simply sat on the porch, drinking coffee, saying nothing else about it, letting the ordinary sounds of a Sunday morning, a neighbor's lawnmower, a dog barking 2 houses down, slowly replace the memory of a frozen parking lot with something calmer. The days that followed were quieter than Emily had anticipated. No cars waited outside her apartment, no envelopes appeared at the diner. Priya kept glancing nervously toward the door for a week, certain that a man like Victor Castellano didn't simply accept rejection and disappear. "He's planning something," Priya whispered one night. "Men like that don't just walk away." "Maybe he did," Emily said, though she wasn't entirely sure she believed it herself. Word moved through the neighborhood the way it always did. in fragments and rumors that grew stranger with each retelling. Someone had heard that Victor had shut down 2 of his less legitimate operations within days of the wedding. Someone else swore his lieutenant, a quiet man named Renzo, had told a cousin that Victor hadn't spoken more than a few sentences to anyone in a week. The stories didn't add up cleanly, but they all pointed toward the same strange, unfamiliar direction. Victor Castellano had gone still. 3 weeks after the wedding, Emily's father called her, his voice tight with confusion. "There's a man here," her father said. "Says his name is Victor. Says he wants to speak with me, not you. Should I let him in?" Emily's stomach dropped. "Dad, don't." "He's already sitting in the living room, sweetheart. Seems polite enough, a little intense." By the time Emily arrived, breathless from rushing across town, Victor was sitting across from her father at the kitchen table, no men waiting outside, no car idling at the curb. He had come alone, on foot, dressed in a plain gray coat instead of his usual tailored overcoat. "What are you doing here?" Emily demanded. "Talking to your father," Victor said simply. "Not about you. About me." He deserved to know exactly who had been sending checks to his hospital, and exactly what kind of man had been circling his daughter. Emily's father looked between them, clearly having absorbed a great deal in the last 20 minutes. "He told me everything, Emily. The businesses, the parts of his life he isn't proud of. He didn't ask me to convince you of anything. He asked me to tell you, if I felt it was true, that he understood why you said no." "I don't need you explaining yourself to my father," Emily said, though her voice had lost some of its earlier fire. Victor stood, buttoning his coat. "I'm not here to convince you to marry me. I already made that mistake once, in front of an audience, treating a question about your whole life like something that could be settled with a ring and a room full of witnesses. I came to tell your father the truth, because you deserved a father who knew exactly who had been near his daughter, and because I owed you that much, whether or not it changes anything for us." He turned to leave, and Emily, against every instinct telling her to let him walk out the same way he'd walked away from the wedding, found herself speaking before she'd decided to. "Why does it matter to you, what I think of you, I mean?" Victor paused in the doorway. "Because you were the only person in years who refused to be bought, or impressed, or intimidated. You rejected me in front of 4 of my own men and didn't flinch once. I've spent my whole life surrounded by people who tell me what they think I want to hear. You told me the truth, even when it cost you something to say it. That matters more to me than I know how to explain." He left before she could respond, walking down the quiet street alone. Emily stood in her father's doorway for a long time afterward, watching the space where he'd been. Part 5. What he left behind. Over the following month, Victor Castellano's name began appearing in the local paper, for reasons that had nothing to do with rumor or fear. The docks he controlled quietly restructured under new, legitimate management, according to the business section, with union contracts renegotiated in workers' favor for the first time in a decade. 2 of his trucking companies donated an entire fleet's worth of retired vehicles to a community outreach program. The warehouse that had once burned down suspiciously before an audit was rebuilt, at his expense, as a job training center. None of it was announced with fanfare. None of it carried his name attached in any prominent way. Emily only knew because Priya, who read the paper obsessively now out of pure fascination, kept bringing in clipped articles and laying them on the counter without comment. "He's not doing this for you," Priya said one night, though her tone suggested she didn't fully believe her own words. "Is he?" "I don't know," Emily admitted. She found out eventually when Marco, the same driver who had once waited outside her apartment on Victor's orders, appeared at the diner alone, without a car waiting outside, without a suit that announced his employer's wealth. "He's not sending me to bring you anywhere," Marco said quickly, before Emily could react. "He doesn't know I'm here. I just thought you should know he's serious about the changes. It's not for show. He's dismantling the parts of the business that used to scare people, piece by piece. Been at it since the wedding." "Why are you telling me this?" Marco shrugged. "Because I've worked for him 9 years, and I've never seen him like this. He doesn't talk about it. He just works, later, and harder than any of us, like he's trying to become someone worth asking twice." Emily set down the coffee pot, studying Marco carefully. "Is he angry? About the wedding, I mean. Really angry? Underneath whatever this is?" "I've seen Victor angry," Marco said. "I've seen what happens to people who cross him when he's angry. This isn't that. This is something I don't have a word for. Quieter. He canceled a meeting last week with a supplier who'd shorted us on a shipment. Used to be the kind of thing that would have cost that man his contract on the spot. Victor just told Renzo to renegotiate the terms and move on. Nobody could figure out why. I think I can, now. And what's that? I think he's trying to prove something to himself before he ever tries to prove it to you again, Marco said. Whether he manages it or not, that's not really my business to say. I just thought you deserved to know it wasn't nothing. Whatever this turns into, or doesn't turn into, it wasn't nothing to him. Emily didn't know what to do with that, so she simply thanked Marco and let him leave. She spent the rest of her shift turning his words over in her mind long after the diner had emptied out, wiping down a counter that didn't need wiping, the way she always did when her hands needed something to do that her mind couldn't settle on its own. Part 6. The Test. Not everyone in Victor's world welcomed the changes quietly. 3 weeks after the wedding, a man named Salvatore Greco, who ran the West Side operations that had long coexisted uneasily alongside Victor's, requested a meeting. Renzo, Victor's oldest lieutenant, delivered the message with visible unease. He's heard about the restructuring, Renzo said. The union contracts, the warehouse, all of it. He thinks you're going soft, Victor. He wants to talk about absorbing the docks before someone else does. Set the meeting, Victor said. They met in a private room above a restaurant Victor had once used for far less civil conversations. Salvatore arrived with 2 men of his own, settling into his chair with the easy confidence of someone who believed he already held the winning hand. I'll be direct, Salvatore said. Word is you're dismantling everything that made the Castellano name worth respecting. Union contracts, job training centers. It's charming, Victor, but charming doesn't hold territory. I'm prepared to make a generous offer for the docks before you give them away for free out of some new sense of conscience. The docks aren't for sale, Victor said. Everything's for sale. You taught me that yourself. Years ago. I said a lot of things years ago that I don't stand behind anymore. Victor's voice remained level, but something in his posture shifted, the old stillness returning, the same stillness that had once made grown men go quiet in restaurants and libraries alike. Let me be clear, Salvatore, so there's no confusion when you leave this room. I'm not weak. I've simply decided what kind of man I want to be remembered as. The docks stay under my name, run the way I've decided to run them. If you'd like to test whether restructuring has made me slower to respond to a threat, you're welcome to try. I'd advise against it. Salvatore studied him for a long moment, searching for the bluff and clearly failing to find one. You've changed. I have, Victor agreed. Everything that made me dangerous is still here. I've just decided it no longer needs to be aimed at everyone within reach. Salvatore left without his deal. His men didn't say another word on the way out. Renzo, watching the door close behind them, allowed himself a small, relieved breath. I thought that might go differently, Renzo admitted once they were alone. So did I, Victor said. A year ago it would have. What changed? Victor didn't answer immediately. He looked out the window instead, toward the docks in the distance, toward the ordinary, unremarkable city spread beneath the gray afternoon sky. Someone told me no, Victor finally said. In front of everyone I brought, to make sure she couldn't. I've spent every day since trying to become someone worth a different answer. Part 7. The Return. Victor came back to the diner on a Tuesday night, nearly 2 months after the wedding, alone, no men waiting outside, no car idling at the curb. He sat in his old booth in the corner, and when Emily approached with the coffee pot, out of pure habit, her hands trembled slightly for reasons she couldn't entirely name. I wasn't sure you'd come back, Emily said. This. One way or another, not a proposal, not a demonstration, just the truth. Emily set the pot down and sat across from him, something she had never once done in all the months he'd been coming to the diner. I've spent 2 months trying to become a man capable of asking a real question, Victor said, instead of making a demand dressed up as one. I'm not asking you to marry me tonight. I'm asking if you'd let me take you to dinner, as 2 people, with no cars outside and no rings in my pocket, so we can find out honestly whether there's anything here worth building, without me deciding the answer before you've had the chance to. Emily studied him for a long moment, remembering the parking lot, the ring box catching the string lights, 4 men waiting to see how their boss would react to being told no. Why should I believe this is different? Emily asked. 2 months ago you brought an audience to make sure I couldn't refuse you. What's stopping you from doing something like that again the moment things don't go your way? Nothing's stopping me, except the fact that I don't want to be that man anymore, Victor said. I spent 2 months learning that the version of myself who needed an audience to feel certain of an answer wasn't someone I respected. I'd rather ask you quietly in an empty diner and risk hearing no again than ever put you in that position twice. That's a nice speech, It's not a speech. It's the truth. Plainly. And I don't know a better way to say it anymore. He paused, looking at her directly. I'm not the same man who sat in this booth 11 weeks ago, thinking a hospital bill and a ring were the same kind of gift. I don't know if that matters to you. But it matters to me, and I wanted you to hear it from me directly, without anyone else in the room. One dinner, Emily finally said. No cars, no men, just you, just me, Victor agreed. And if I say no again at the end of it, then I'll thank you for the dinner and I'll still come in on Tuesdays for coffee, if you'll let me, and I won't ask again unless you're the one who brings it up first. Victor's voice was steady, without any of the old certainty that had once made refusal feel impossible. I've learned the difference now, Emily, between wanting someone and owning the outcome. I only want the first one anymore. It wasn't a happy ending delivered all at once, the way the string lights and the ring box had promised weeks earlier. It was smaller than that. Quieter, a single dinner, unremarkable in every visible way, between a man learning slowly how to want something without demanding it, and a woman who had discovered that the loudest, most powerful room could still be silenced by one honest word. Epilogue, 1 year later. The diner had new owners now. Emily had used her savings, plus a modest loan she insisted on paying back in full, to buy out Rosie's diner from its retiring owner. The little corner booth where Victor once sat every night for 2 hours drinking black coffee remained, unofficially, reserved. He still came most Tuesday nights. He still ordered black coffee. But now he waited at the counter and helped close up sometimes, when the rain was bad, and Priya had long since stopped watching the door with suspicion whenever his car appeared outside. There was no ring yet. Emily had been clear about that, and Victor, to his credit, had never once pushed the timeline forward. What there was, instead, was something steadier. A man who had rebuilt half his empire around the shape of one honest rejection, and a woman who had learned that saying no, clearly and without apology, in front of every witness who mattered, could change more than she ever imagined it could. You know, Priya said one slow Tuesday night, watching Victor help stack chairs after closing, sleeves rolled up, tie loosened, looking nothing like the man who had once walked into a wedding reception with 4 armed men behind him. I never would have believed this a year ago. Neither would I, Emily admitted. What changed him? Emily watched Victor set the last chair down and glanced toward her, the corner of his mouth lifting into something that had, over the past year, become entirely ordinary. The good kind of ordinary. The kind you stop noticing because it's finally safe to. I said no, Emily said simply, and for the first time in his life, someone meant it. Victor walked over, drying his hands on a dish towel that looked entirely out of place against his tailored shirt, and leaned against the counter beside her. She's telling you the origin story again? Victor asked, glancing at Priya. She tells it better every time, Priya said. Next version, you'll probably be riding in on a horse. There was no horse, Victor said. Just a very expensive ring I never got to give her. You still have it? Priya asked, unable to hide her curiosity. I do, Victor admitted. It's in a drawer. I decided a long time ago I wasn't going to bring it out again until I was certain the answer wouldn't be about the ring at all. Emily glanced at him, something warm passing between them, the kind of look that had taken a full year of ordinary Tuesdays to build. And if I said you could ask again? Then I'd tell you I'm not in a hurry, Victor said. I spent most of my life demanding things the moment I wanted them. I'd like for once to want something patiently, and let it arrive on its own time. Priya rolled her eyes, gathering her coat from behind the counter. You two are going to give me a cavity. I'm locking up. Don't stay too late. Some of us have actual jobs to open in the morning. The door chimed behind her. The diner settled into the particular calm that comes after a long shift, just the hum of the refrigerator and the soft tap of rain returning against the windows, the same rain that had been falling the night Victor first walked through that door in a charcoal overcoat. Coffee ordered, eyes lingering 2 seconds too long. Same booth? Victor asked, nodding toward the corner. Same booth, Emily said, and poured 2 cups of coffee, one for each of them. For a while, neither of them said anything at all, content simply to sit together in a diner that had once been the site of an offer neither of them could have predicted, and was now, gradually, becoming something else entirely, not an ending, and not quite a beginning, but the steady, unremarkable middle of 2 people learning how to build something honest, one ordinary Tuesday at a time. If Emily and Victor's story kept you hooked till the end, hit that like button and let us know, We put everything into telling grounded, deeply human stories about second chances, respect, and the courage it takes to say no. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss our next release. Share this with someone who loves a good redemption arc, and drop a comment telling us your favorite moment.